If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who explore places in the middle of nowhere, deep woods, mountains, etc. What is the creepiest thing you have come across? Was camping in northern British Columbia, about 15 miles down an old logging road, 2 hours away from any civilization. In the dead of the night, me and my buddy were awoken by a sound neither one of us ever heard before, coming from a range about 2 miles away. Wasn't a bear, nor a wolf, bobcat. It sounded like cross between a gorilla and a grizzly. It kept growling and what sounded like faint thumping sounds, sounded like a log being smashed against a tree. This went on for about 45 minutes, as we sat there, clutching our 12-gram shotguns. We weren't hunting, we were in grizzly bear country. The growling and thumping were getting closer, so we thought. We said screw this and hastily threw everything in my truck, tossed water on smoldering fire and bailed. We hit the first truck stop about 1 hour later and talking to the locals, who were native, told us we probably heard a Sasquatch and the sounds we heard were some type of mating call. My buddy still lives out there and now he's become a full-time Bigfoot tracker. Was about 10 and up at the house of my grandparents who live fairly far off the beaten path up on a mountain. Was driving up their long driveway with my mom when we see this huge black thing laying in the middle of the road. At first, we thought it was a black bear, as they are not uncommon in that area. As we get closer to it, it doesn't move, and we realize that this animal is most likely dead. It's so big that we can't drive around it without going off of the driveway, so we stop and get out to get a closer look. It's not a bear. It's a ducking porcupine. Now, at that point in my life I thought that porcupines didn't get much bigger than a hedgehog. I was wrong. This thing was absolutely massive. Even my mom, who was no stranger to seeing the wildlife of the area, was floored by the sheer size of this animal. The fact that it was dead and fairly bloated made it even bigger and scarier looking. I was absolutely traumatized. I would have been less scared if it actually was a bear. My grandpa ended up having to heave it off of the road with one of his huge farming tools, and I have a healthy fear of porcupines to this day. I know this will be buried, but back when I was a kid I went hunting with my dad. We had seen a cow, female moose, and her young following her. My dad said we don't want to duck with them. Around 10 to 15 minutes later we hear this call almost like a honk. Then we saw the female hauling us toward us. My dad was scared she was charging us, but nope, she just ran past us. Then my dad got curious and we walked back the way we came. What I had seen still makes me a little scared 20 years later. One of the calves had been ripped ripped and mauled by something. The second calf was just missing all but its leg. My dad was extremely worried because, 1. It takes a lot to scare off a mother moose, and I mean a lot. A mother moose will easily die for her young. 2. There were no tracks, nothing, all but moose tracks. We spent like 30 minutes looking for them but nothing except moose tracks. 3. Most of animals won't duck with a mother moose, especially when her young is near, much less attack the young. If they were going to attack they would go for the mother, not the young. I only really camp at Bloodstock and or download in the UK as times permit. But my weirdest was camping at Wacken open air many years ago. I have no idea how, but some German lot a few tents over brought some sort of Hammond organ sounding type thing with them. We got woken up at 4 a.m. hearing someone play it and everyone singing along, in German. I got out of my tent, closely followed by a mate in the next tent, and it took a few seconds to adjust, but almost all of them were stark bollock naked. They saw us, I think they called us over, in German, and offered us beer. So there we were, in boxers and surrounded by naked Germans, hoi hoi hoing along to what on ever the hell they were singing in German. It was a strange start to the day. Only one of the ladies spoke English well, the others were not great at it. And I have no idea how they managed to get a Hammond organ in with them. Nor how they powered it. But it was good. Actually, one of the girls had her arm around me and her boob was pretty much on me. I kinda figured one of the dudes was her boyfriend. All I could think was, don't get a boner, don't get a boner. Hated year 4 camp because my friend on the bus ride there told me this story. There was once a family with a mother, father and son. They lived in a street called Slide Street. One week the parents decide to go on a trip without the boy. Before leaving, the father tells the son, if you hear the noises, click clock slide, turn off all the lights, lock all the doors and stay completely silent. That's all you need to know for the rest of the week. The son thinks nothing of it, and for some reason the parents of the street leave for something as well. The first night the son is reading comics and watching TV when he faintly hears click clock slide. He remembers what his dad said and locks doors, turns off the lights and is silent. He falls asleep and wakes up the next morning completely fine. He looks outside and sees no one weirdly since it was 11 a.m. but he doesn't think much of it. He then safeguards the house and does the procedures early but he never hears anything for the next 2 nights, but on the 4th night he thinks maybe it was just a one-off thing and doesn't pre-set up the house until he hears click-clock slide. But this time it's as if it's coming from the driveway, so he does everything but the lights and accidentally leaves some on, but he makes it through the night. He pre-sets up the house 2 more times but doesn't for the last night when his parents are meant to be back but they don't come that night, and then he hears click-clock slide. But this time it seems as if it's at their front door, so he just runs to his room and does nothing until he looks in the hallway and sees a woman with no legs on her arms, then realizes why those sounds were being. It was from her long nails digging into the ground, then her cracking her knuckles and finally sliding. Then he realizes why no one else came out bid their homes, because they were already dead. He tries to run but can't, he's paralyzed from fear. The woman drags herself toward him and carves out his heart. The parents knew that someone had to die in every house in the street so that they weren't all hunted down. I'm a practitioner of the craft, so adventures into the mountains/forests/deserts have always been common for me, and considering I've lived all over the US, I've had plenty of encounters with monsters, fae, and others. This particular story takes place in rural southern Alabama, at a place I'll simply refer to as the Breathing Tree, for spooky purposes. The Breathing Tree was an absolutely massive and cut-up tree on the far end of a roughly square, clearly deep in some forests I found while stepping aside from a creek. I was in the area researching local fae, and it was getting late. I had lost my way, and sat down on the side of the river bank, and asked for a guide, forgetting for a moment how tricky unfamiliar fae can be. When I had opened my eyes a while later, the sun was getting low, and a butterfly had flapped at the corner of my vision. I took it as a good omen, and followed it away from the river. My first mistake. Eventually, I reached the clearing, and the Breathing Tree. Frustrated with the dimming light, but happy at my regained cell connection, I sent my GPS location to a friend, and found I was only a couple hundred feet from a road. I told him to come grab me, and sat down at the tree to meditate. Within minutes, I heard breathing behind me. A couple years prior, and it would have startled me, but I figured it was some kind of beast, fae or animal, and would soon pass on. Fae hardly like to reveal themselves physically, but auditory hallucinations are simple for the more powerful ones. A few more minutes pass, and I snap to. My mind had wandered to the verge of sleep, somehow, and I was wondering why I was suddenly so awake. Then I felt it. Something breathed on my neck. And I stopped moving entirely. My hands felt cold to the touch. I was sweating despite the cold wind blowing around me. The heavy breathing was rhythmic, and stopped when I stopped. Whatever it was large, incredibly so. I could feel its sheer presence behind me, and it shredded any wards I attempted to put up with every breath it took. My mental fortitudes were in rubble and I was exhausted almost immediately. I gripped the grass and stood with shaking body. The breathing followed me up, and I knew immediately there was no coincidence. I had ventured too far, and trespassed onto something horrible. What are you? No response. I wish to take my leave. I am sorry for my rude behavior. May I leave? The breathing hitches, and my neck goes cold as the creature vanishes, and I nearly jump out of my boots at the sudden noise. A dog bark, followed by a flashlight, and my friend. He was at the edge of the clearing. I didn't let him step in, but later on the drive home, he had told me he was waiting for well over 30 minutes for me. He was well over 20 minutes out. This was not my last visit to the Breathing Tree, but definitely the most frightening. Was camping back when I was 14 to 15 with 2 other friends. We'd set up in a field near a creek just outside of town. It wasn't too far from one of the guys' house, so we'd hiked in maybe a mile or 2. Night came, we built a decent size fire and were roughhousing in the field. Sharing some beers that we'd stolen from who knows where. We wandered some distance from the campsite and started back. It was then that we saw a dark mass behind the fire. Roughly in the snap of a person. Almost like a shadow of someone that was standing there. We all thought it was the one friend's dad coming to check on us, so we all yelled to him. No response. We decided it would be funny to throw some rocks then since he wasn't responding. We threw some small gravel stones at the shadow. We could hear the stones hit something that wasn't the ground or the trees behind the shadow. We all kind of looked at each other, and at the same time the shadow slipped down and scurried off into the woods. You could hear the footsteps, but there were too many. More like something with 4 legs or more would make. That wasn't the only time we had issues out in those woods. I go camping every few months. A few years back I went to this area that's not very popular and stayed with my friend in separate tents for a week. This place was in a forest. The first 4 nights were normal, but after that little things started happening, like we'd wake up and things would be knocked over or moved, This continued for 2 nights, and on our last night someone started to unzip my tent. I heard my friend yell, "I've got a gun," and started to come out of his tent. The guy ran off and we packed up and left. One night I was camping alone. When I showed up to the campground there was 2 cars parked in the parking lot. One was a family and the other was a guy looked like he was in his 30s. I didn't see him till after I set up my camp. The family left, and as they were leaving the family man looked at me and told me to be safe. He looked concerned. As the day turned and went dark I noticed the guy who was still there was strange. He kept looking in and around his car, taking everything out and putting it back inside. He was on drugs and just ducking weird, looking for a cigarette. He came to ask me for one. I gave him one. I should have left, but I was stupid AF back then, plus it was late and I wasn't near my home. I guess I could have went to rent a hotel. I wish I did. The night was thunder and lightning and wind. I was enjoying seeing the lightning storm from inside my tent. Was finishing up the last of my beer and was ready to lay down and get some rest. I think I was trying to not be worried about that strange guy not too far away. My tent was by the bathroom, which had an outlet, so earlier in the day I had charged my phone just a bit. Anyway, as I lay down and get ready to doze off I get a sickening feeling in my gut. It was windy outside, so the tent was moving a bit, actually quite a lot. It was loud. My mind went to fear very quickly. I started to think about the guy out there, and how I was there all alone. At night, I got on my phone, which had a little bit of charge, and reached out to a few friends for comfort, someone to talk to about where I was and how I was feeling. I don't think I'd ever been so scared in my life. I even cried, I was so scared. Just typing it I'm getting the chills. My phone died. I had no light except the little bit of moonlight which made it able for me to see shadows outside of my tent. I knew I wasn't alone. I had my knife in my hand ready in case I needed to defend myself. I looked above me, and this I don't know if it was just my mind playing tricks or real, but what I think I saw or was seeing was a shadow above my head where I was laying, and it looked like a person. I thought I saw the shoulders and the head just standing there. I was scared that the guy was standing there right above looking over my tent. This lasted a while. I held onto my knife so tight. And I didn't get to sleep. One of the longest nights of my life. I honestly don't think I'll never go camping alone again. Next time I'll get a hotel room for the night. When I was young, I was walking around my backyard during late spring/early summer. I have a fairly large woods in the backyard and often took strolls alone even though I wasn't supposed to. We had no trails, so my family feared I would get lost or shot at by one of our crazy neighbors. On that day, I was walking back to my house when all of a sudden I heard something thrashing about whenever I was walking. The odd thing about it was that whenever I stopped moving, so would the thing that was jumping or frolicking about. At first I doubted myself, but it kept happening. I would move and the rustling would happen, over and over again. Fortunately, I recognized this movement from documentaries, books, and the like, and was familiar with animal stalking/hunting tactics. With this information in mind I took a few steps again just to make sure, and the pattern repeated. When I moved, it moved closer. When I froze, it froze. Needless to say, this would be enough to make a grown man's heart begin to tremble, and here I was only about 14, by myself in the woods I wasn't supposed to be in. As a shiver wiggled down my spine I concluded some sort of wild feline was following me, likely a bobcat or a cougar considering the state I live in. I knew my best chance to make this beast stop following me was to face it and walk backwards, so I did. If I'm looking at the creature and it's stalking me, it won't move when I face it to avoid being noticed. I thought to myself. After thinking I was in the clear, I turned around and started walking normally, but I could hear the animal take a few lunges through the brush and catch up with me. I turned to face the creature and walked the rest of the way out of the woods backwards. Granted, I got poked by nettles and ran into a few trees, but at least the animal didn't follow me. Once I was a decent way into my yard and beside my dog, I spun around and ran into the house and told no one what happened in fear I would be lectured for sneaking off into the woods alone. Come to find out, a week or so later, my dad's buddy who lived a few houses down the road caught an image of a small young cougar on his trail cam. Cougars have been known to attack humans, and I am rather thankful I watched those documentaries. When I was camping one time, we stopped at a small campground for one night before heading to our actual destination the next day. The first weird thing was that we'd never been to that camp before and haven't been back since, but looking out at the river, it just seemed so familiar, like an insane level of déjà vu. I kept walking back to the same spot on the river like I was drawn to it. Weird, but not too crazy. While we were there, I went on a bike ride by myself into the woods, and ended up finding an abandoned cabin. Part of the roof was caved in, there was an old iron stove in a corner, even a bed frame, and a big hole in the center of the floor. I remember the whole thing so vividly, I could draw a map. I thought it was really exciting, So I went back to camp and told my family. They wanted to see it too, so I showed them the way. I'm 100% certain I followed the exact same path. It was less than 2 miles away and you could still see my bike tire tracks in the dirt. We got there, and there was a big clearing, and absolutely no cabin. All I could find was a few random, rusted old gears and tools embedded in the earth. It was like the whole cabin grew legs like Baba Yaga's house and walked away, except even then there might have been footprints. We searched the whole area within a 2-mile radius of our camp as thoroughly as we could but found nothing. We even asked the campground host if there was anything like that around. She said not anymore. Unless they cleared a whole cabin in less than an hour, there definitely was one that day. The one night we spent there, I had a horrible nightmare about someone being shot and dying in the river next to our campsite. I can still see their blood in the water and the feeling of a body going cold. But I frequently have nightmares and have since I was a kid, so that's possibly coincidental. It was really smoky at the time since there has been a forest fire recently several miles away. Best we can figure, the smoke made me confused. But I saw the cabin so clearly and even touched things inside. I know something existed. Maybe I just wasn't sure where. As far as paranormal stuff goes, I've always loved a good ghost story, but I like to keep an open mind. I think there is a paranormal and a rational explanation to everything, and I'm open to either being the truth. I've always seen tons of abandoned stuff in the woods before and since. A ranger station, a mining camp, old buildings, just some random stairs, even a cellar. Still, that experience always bothered me. I left a letter for the ghost and a bracelet I wove under a rock by the river, at the place I saw in my dream. I'd why? Just as a nice gesture, I guess, to acknowledge that I saw them. I was big into off-trail hiking. I would usually track animals and find really cool spots to hang out, meditate and smoke a bowl. I had a good friend that was into doing the same thing, and one weekend we decided to go hiking together, find some killer views, smoke a bowl and talk about life. Well, we got lost. The road we wanted to take was closed, and we decided to follow the detour and see where it would take us. I should mention that we were in the middle of nowhere. The mountains are beautiful and are filled with hidden streams and waterfalls, but they are almost inaccessible due to the terrain. I have been out to the area many times, and never encountered a single soul. Anyhow, back to the detour. The road should have connected with another arterial, but soon we found ourselves on a logging road that dead-ended in the middle of nowhere. We thought it was weird, but we were like, okay, cool, an adventure. We see what looks like an old logging trail and decide to take an animal trail to the south of it. We gather up our bags, and let out my German Shepherd, rescue dog, and best darn dog that I have ever had. This is important because to get everything we needed we had to walk around my truck. We head out about 30 minutes into the trail, and begin to feel like we are being watched. It was a bad feeling, like the kind of bad that makes your stomach drop and instinct takes over. Relevant side note: I left home when I was 16, and was homeless for a while. There is nothing like a situation like that to teach you how to have eyes in the back of your head. Back to the story. The forest is silent. Not a bird moving in a tree, no squirrels, literally there is no noise. It is supernaturally calm. And then we hear a stick break about 30 feet behind us on the trail. We assume it is a cougar, as they frequent these mountains, and so we keep pressing on, but the feeling doesn't pass. I motion for my friend to keep talking, as I slide off into the brush and double back. I have my dog with me, a hunting knife and some bear spray. I am still wanting to believe it is a cougar, so I figure that I will be okay. As I get close to a turn in the trail, I hear some crashing in the bushes, odd because the forest is still silent, but again it could be a bear, cougar, ect. My dog goes running towards the sound and then stops and begins growling. I figure the gig is up, and step back out onto the trail, and that is when I notice a third set of footprints, new, large, male. I pretend that my dog is lost, and then head on back down the trail to catch up with my friend. I mouth to her that I saw another set of footprints, and at that time we decide to climb higher up onto the mountain so that we can see if anyone is approaching from below. I am pretty sure that this saved our lives. As we are hiking back to the car, we discover several hunting blinds. This is off-season, hunting is illegal, and most of the animals people really want to poach are still higher up in the mountains. But there was still warm food sitting on a plate. It was eerie as hell. We flat out booked it out of the mountain so damn fast, with my dog running off and growling at the person we now know is following us. We unlock my truck as soon as we see it, and grab my dog in as we are pulling away, and that is when we notice the flat tire. Someone sliced my tire to shreds. And this is when I said duck it, and gave thanks for having a sturdy truck that I didn't care about. I didn't care if I ruined the car, the axle or the wheel. I just wanted out of there. When we got down to the highway, a term I use loosely, I pull over and patch the tire and pump it full of air as fast as I could. I know we saw something we shouldn't have seen. We made it to a gas station, just barely, also very creepy, complete with the old man and dusty cans of beans, change the tire and then drive as fast as we can back into cell range when we call the cops. I don't think they believed us. I am pretty sure they thought it was an animal, but people go missing in the woods all the time around here. Especially in that area. I didn't know this until I got home and did some research. This was the end of my off-trail hikes. I now only go on heavily populated trails, with a group of people and always leave the name of the hike and a map, along with my expected return time with my best friend. It isn't nearly as enjoyable, but it sure is a heck of a lot safer. Moral of the story, trust your instincts, tell someone where you are going and when you will be back, carry bear spray and your survival pack. Always have an emergency repair kit in your car, battery charger, air pump for your tire, a patching kit, flares and a couple of flashlights, no matter how safe and reliable it is. I forgot to add, we saw the same footprints leading from the shelter down to the animal trail we had been on. There is no doubt in my mind that we were being stalked, if not hunted. A few years ago, I went hiking up at the abandoned mountain park in Holyoke with my cousins and aunt. The part that we went to used to be a ski resort but also had a wave pool for the summer. Many of the buildings are still standing and safe enough to walk inside, so of course, we did. But we didn't think ahead and only had our phone flashlights, so it was very dark. We went into the main building and looked around, not much but broken bottles and graffiti on white walls. Eventually, we found an old cement staircase leading into a basement that looked to be old lockers or something for skiers. We went down with just the light from 3 flashlights in a room with no sunlight. And when I say it was quiet, I mean there wasn't a single sound. Not of a board moving, not the wind blowing, not even rustling of branches despite us being on Mount Tom where there's usually plenty of normal outdoor noise. One of my older cousins and her friend went down all the way to check it out, but my younger cousin and I were too scared, so we waited on the stairs with my aunt. My older cousin and her friend were not even 10 feet away from us, but we couldn't even hear them moving. Just a minute later, they come running up the stairs screaming, saying that they heard something moving, so we all run outside through the door just a couple feet away. On the way out, my cousin happens to drop her empty Red Bull can coming up the stairs. We finally get outside and collect ourselves, and we ask why she dropped the can. She said that she felt someone, or something, graze her arm. At this point we're all so shocked with adrenaline and freaked out, but we finally get up the courage to walk back in. We walk back in and look at the staircase, just to notice that my cousin's can that she dropped, was on the top stair standing up like it was placed there. That's when we really all lost it. She dropped it about halfway up the staircase, and there's no way that an empty can thrown backward could have ended up standing up perfectly. To this day, we don't know what happened. We never saw anyone or anything there, and have no idea how the can ended up like that. We've gone back a couple times but never gone back down those stairs. Some people say it could have been someone homeless hiding out there, but remind you there's no running water up there, just what the rain brings, and it's a good 2 to 3 miles from the parking area and another 2 miles from the main road. That'd be a lot of walking every day to find food or water. People did die at this park when it was running, and many were injured. My pav is that it was a ghost. I'm sure many will think I'm crazy, but there's no way that what happened by itself, whatever you want to call it. I went to a canoe camping, in northern Canada while I was growing up. When I was there, the camp was already 102 years old. In the early years of the camp they had First Nation, Cree and Ojibwe, guides on the trips. And in the early 1910s they had a very popular and good guide, who had just gotten married. He moved his wife out to a remote island on one of the lakes and built a cabin with her out there. There were a few other cabins on the lake, but it was quite remote but on a fur trading route. They had a happy first winter there, but he was gone all summer guiding canoe trips, and during the fall and spring he would be gone for weeks at a time trapping animals for furs, only coming home to the remote cabin to get different clothes and drop off supplies to his young wife. One trip early in the fall he came home to drop off supplies, and his wife had lost her mind, and she killed him by chopping him in the head with an axe. They found her screaming, stark mad, and naked on the shore of their island. She was committed and died shortly afterwards. She never recovered her mind. In the late 1990s, in the early fall, a husband and wife were canoe tripping down that same lake and were caught in a terrible storm. They took shelter on the island. They tried to set up their tent, but it was torn away by the wind. The guide's cabin still stood. The years had blown out the windows and collapsed part of the roof, but it was shelter enough from the storm. They hunkered down there that day and into the night as the storm raged on. The next morning the wife was found naked and screaming for help, adrift in their canoe on the lake. The waters were still rough from the storm the day before and she was inconsolable. She claimed a native man with half a head tore her clothes from her as she slept, and that she was chased by a naked corpse of a woman into the night until she escaped in their canoe. She didn't know where her husband was. They found his body in the ruins of the cabin, with half his head missing. They never solved the murder. Last year, my fiancé and I are driving our cheap, little rust bucket van through Catalonia, Spain. We are wild camping most nights and go deep into the hills of a national park, Parc del Garraf, west of Barcelona. Get there early and park up near some old abandoned buildings, occasional mountain bikers or 4x4 coming by, one man taking photos of plants. Start semi-talking with photographer, shows us some videos from his friend of loads of foxes turning up, really tame, whilst his mate was parked up there for the night. He also told us that people think there were ghosts up here, which I blame on the sound of foxes, as they sound like someone getting murdered if you don't know what it is. So I chucked a couple of bits of egg out when I had a sandwich at lunch, to get the smell floating around for a good time, so we could chill and meet the critters in the evening. We went to watch the sunset and it was pretty much black when walking back to the van. We're completely alone for miles off this little dirt track our valiant little van managed to push through. We come round the corner of the bushes next to the van and the missus suddenly throws her arm out in front of my chest. There is a big dark shape next to the van. Having gone not too far away in the light, we had no torch immediately to hand. In the darkness I could see the outline of this dark thing but no real features. It looked roughly like the outline of an oversized German Shepherd, with a longer snout, and bigger ears. I love dogs, have worked at Crufts a couple of times and have seen many different breeds, and I know the darkness can play tricks on your eyes. But the moment I saw that shape, some deeply ingrained, ancient instinct instantly identified wolf. Normally I would love to have seen something like this in the wild, and apart from a bit of a surprised shout, Anna and I went silent and froze. However, instead of turning and running as I expected, this huge black shape then started to move towards us. I had a 2-liter bottle of water, and threw it full force. I'm a 6 feet 5 inches and about 17 stone, and this thing was just a couple of meters away by this point. A 2 kilograms projectile hurled by me, point blank, wouldn't be that nice. Shitting myself that it was going to miss and it would just skitter off in the dirt. I was relieved when it made a heavy impact on the thing. However, it was as if I had thrown it against a wall. It thumped solidly off the shape and bounced away. It didn't seem to have affected it. Silence. Not a surprised yelp, not a whimper, no frantic scrabble of legs as it whips around a scarper. It didn't seem to move. The creature then casually turned and moved away. It went behind the van and I moved round the front to keep eyes on it, fumbling for a small keychain torch, scared to death but also keen to get a proper look. It was off into the trees before I was able to get the light out and I wasn't willing to pursue it. The thing that freaked me out was that it started moving towards us. I always expected anything wild to run the moment we bumped into it. I may have been 5 at the time but I still remember it with vivid detail. My grandmother and grandfather took me and my sister camping. My sister is older than me so she chose where she was going to sleep first, though as our cabin was set up, outside there was a grill and a picnic table. Inside there was a master bed with a set of tall drawers up against the wall and a small TV that only played older shows. Going to the back of the cabin there was a slim doorway and inside there was 2 bunk beds. Me and my sister slept on the bunk on the right side of the room. She had the top bunk and I obviously had the lower bunk. Our grandmother rolled the TV into the slim doorway. You could hear it roll on the hardwood floor in the cabin. At night me and my sister cracked some glow sticks and went to sleep with the TV on. I heard scratching on the little window in our room. I was a pretty smart kid and I liked the outdoors. I thought it was just a bird but it started getting louder and then the TV started cutting out and it just showed static. This scared me at the time so I hid under my covers and eventually got to sleep. The next morning we went to the river and my grandfather was talking to some rafters who got stuck on rocks and decided to rest near the area we were at. They asked him if he had a gun and he said no. They told him to be careful because they saw some weird people walking around. Luckily we left that day and I later asked my grandmother if she heard anything about the area we were in and she said that day we left she got a call from the people who we rented the cabin from and they told her that the night we were there someone knocked out our cable. Eagle Scout here. When I was maybe 15 to 16, I was on my last requirement for the Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, which was a few-day stint in an isolated section of the woods with only food and water. When you are alone and trying to sleep under a makeshift lean-to on the ground in the woods at night, you start to realize how alive the woods are. You can hear everything, even the slightest movement. The ground around me was very alive with the faint rustling of leaves/twigs of various bugs and other animals. Needless to say, I didn't sleep much. Also, Just because it's dark and hard to see for us as humans at night, don't think you'll ever be the one sneaking up on anything in the woods at night, and that it's equally as difficult for animals to sense your presence. Every critter within 100 yards knew about my presence my entire stay. At night I could hear groups of shuffled walking that inched closer to me every 20 minutes or so. After a few hours, I was relieved to learn it was just a few deer letting their curiosity get the better of them and wanted to get a closer look at this white boy out here laying on the ground and what his deal is. So me and my cousin decided to wander off to some trails in Oscar Scherer's park. We had a decent flashlight, so about halfway through our little dick brigade we started talking about demonic stuff. Not more than 3 seconds a loud noise came from a few feet away. We both look at each other and shrug it off, so we round a corner and I noticed a rest bench. We sat there for a minute and I decided to stand on the bench and shine my light around in the distance. Keep in mind this is Florida jungle, forest and plains are a bit different. I slowly scanned the distance, 90% palmetto bushes. Nothing, as me and my cousin joked and said imagine if someone is standing in the distance if I shine the light again at the same time. So I slowly shined the light back and nothing. Then one last time I shined it back and it looked like a silhouette of someone standing in the distance. I stopped with the light just shining on the silhouette in the distance and my cousin says that wasn't there the first 2 times we shined the light. We both looked at each other and booked it. All the while we are running we kept hearing scary shit on our way back. I am younger so I walked my cousin back to his site, then I realized my site was back the way we came so he walked me back. I normally tell the stories of my old house. These all happened at the same house, which was an old farmhouse from the 1800s that was also a part of the Underground Railroad. We no longer live there. The house isn't there anymore. It's a very expensive neighborhood. 1. My parents said that they were sitting on our couch and watching TV. The fireplace shutter opened and closed several times on their own. 2. My mom was sitting in the same living room. Towards her front was a large wooden deck that had a fireplace in the center and 2 large windows on either side. To the right was a concrete porch that ran the length of that side of the house. It had a door off to the side and had several large windows on it as well. To her back was a bedroom that us kids shared in the winter because it was easier to heat half the house. To her left was the blue room. The whole thing was blue, but it was just a central room where our computer happened to be and had access to the basement. Anyways, on the wooden deck, my mom saw a black figure that was as tall as a bear, but too thin to be human. She said that she looked at it and had a feeling that it was watching her. It wasn't completely dark outside, but it was on its way. The figure then started doing laps around the house. It would pass the windows in front of her every few seconds. This was a 2,500-ish square foot farmhouse. It was incredibly fast. 3. We had a small family farm. Chickens, goats, pigs, quail, turkey, ducks etc. Nothing big. We had about 30 chickens at the time. Living that far out in the country, we always set up traps by the coop to catch opossums and raccoons. Anything that ate chickens. Well, we go outside one day to see piles of feathers throughout the yard around the coop. Every single pile had a head on top of it. 30-ish piles. And that many heads. No puddles of blood. No insides anywhere. Just piles of feathers and heads. 4. Shortly after this, my dad, sometimes myself as well, would go out at night with a shotgun to see if we could find anything. We had gotten more chickens and had nothing unusual in the traps. Just cages. My dad was a manly man. Wasn't scared of anything. I've seen him move a tree by himself out of the road that 4 grown men weren't able to get together. He's tough, to say the least. So, he goes out like he usually does. Our chicken coop sits about 50-ish feet in front of our garage. It was really just a 1,000 square foot ranch outbuilding. We just called it the garage. So, we hear 5 blasts or so from the shotgun and very shortly after, my dad comes through the front door with tears running down his face. He is visibly shaking. After he calms down a bit, he explains that while in front of the garage, he heard a real guttural growl coming from the tree line right behind and above the garage. He said it wasn't like anything he had ever heard in his life. He was an avid hunter growing up. He's heard and probably eaten just about any animal that Indiana has to offer. He said it was low and demonic. He said he could just feel that it was evil. He immediately unloaded the shotgun and ran to the house. 5. I don't like to talk about this one much, but it's relevant. I would hear voices in that house. One night, I woke up my parents crying to let them know that the devil wanted my soul and wouldn't stop trying to get me to give it to him. I don't remember much about it because this was about 5th grade. I'm 31 now. I've since been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. I could see where it might have just been my anxiety, but I definitely remember sitting on the living room floor, sobbing at like 3 a.m., just begging for the voices to stop. I haven't had anything else at all similar to this ever happen. 6. My parents found a tunnel in our basement that we assumed was a part of the Underground Railroad. My cousin was over at the time and asked if he could explore it. It was covered up, about shoulder high to an adult, and an adult could crawl through with not a whole lot of extra room. He had a flashlight and was gone for about a half hour. We were starting to get very worried when we could see the light again. He came back and said that there had not been an end in sight, but her was getting nervous having crawled so far. He was probably 16-ish? This is everything that I can remember at the moment. I tried to be very detailed because I'm 100% aware of how unbelievable all of this is. The address of the house was 18401 SR 238, Fortville, Indiana. I don't remember the zip code. The house is no longer there and it is now a subdivision to houses that are $750K plus houses. They didn't end up tearing it down until we had been out for about 4 to 5 years. That's just a guess, but it kept getting delayed for some reason. 2 friends Chris and Brian are exploring an abandoned insane asylum. They start on the first floor and don't hear anything and only see leftover garbage and dust everywhere in the rooms. They go up to the second floor and get this weird feeling of being watched. They both agree it's just the scary feeling of being in the abandoned building. As they walk more into the second floor, they notice a weird smell in the rooms as they walk by, and one room smelling worse than the others. Like as if something recently died on this floor, but not as bad. As they continued to walk, the second floor was losing the natural light and became darker as they went on. Once they reached the end of the second floor, the feeling of being watched has only grown. They reached the end, and as Chris went to open the door to the second backside set of stairs, Brian happened to look around and saw what he thought was someone behind them about 100 feet away in the dark hallway. Brian turns around quick. He tells Chris they're not alone in here. As he says that, they find out the door to the backside stairs is locked and both will have to walk back down the dark second floor hallway. They both turn around only to see nothing in the hallway and hear nothing like when they entered the building. Chris told Brian he's just scared and to come on, let's go. Brian, hesitant to move, swears he saw someone. As they walk down the dark hallway, Brian is behind Chris and looking in each room as they pass them. They are just about halfway until the natural light comes in when Brian looks behind and sees someone only about 50 feet away from them. Again scared, he tells Chris someone is behind them. Chris tells Brian to knock it off and to keep going. As they're walking and enter into the natural light, they hear footsteps. The footsteps were coming from the first floor. Knowing it's trespassing to be in this building, Chris says they need to hide quickly, but quietly walking back down the second floor, Brian sees the person watching them again in the dark as they walk towards the back of the hallway. Brian stops and grabs Chris and whispers someone is down there, stop walking. Chris looks down the dark hallway, can't see anything, and he tells Brian to stop messing with him and to hide in this room. As they get into the room to hide, the smell is now very strong, but the footsteps from the first floor seem to have stopped. As Chris is about to get up from hiding in the stinky room, he hears someone coming from the dark side of the hallway. Shh, it's probably the person from the first floor, said Chris. How? That door was locked. I told you someone was up here, said Brian. Brian backups more into the room trying to hide better, only to trip over something he didn't see. As he got up and felt what it was, he recognized the material, but couldn't tell what it was while in the dark. Moving his hand on the material, he feels something hard, but also soft. He moves his hand over and feels another thing that is hard, but also soft, covered in this material. Now the footsteps from the dark side of the hallway are getting closer. As Brian is wondering what he tripped over, he then realizes it's a sleeping bag and he was just feeling someone's legs. Silent and unable to speak due to fear, Brian backs away very fast, only to knock into something making a lot of noise. The footsteps in the hallway are now increasing speed and about to be at the doorway in 10 seconds. Chris, looking out from his hiding spot wondering what just happened, sees a dark figure rise from the floor. Chris, now scared, yells, "Run, Brian." As Chris got out of his hiding spot and got to the hallway, he gets grabbed by his shirt, swung around and thrown into another room, landing on a broken metal bed frame that goes into his back and through his front side, killing him. Brian, hiding in the dark corner as he watched his friend get grabbed and thrown, can't move a muscle or speak. The dark figure in the sleeping bag has now fully gotten up, and then the thing that grabbed Chris has entered the room. "Jim, was that you making noise that woke me up? Look, Daryl, we need to go now. I was watching these 2 guys search the building for our stash and I just took one of them out. The other is around here somewhere." "Where is Steve at?" said Daryl. "He's on the first floor now," replied Jim. As the 2 homeless guys were leaving, Daryl stopped before he left the room, looked back and said, "I know you're in here," only to shut the door and move debris in front of the door to lock Brian in. Brian, now locked in this pitch black room with no windows, knowing nobody checks on the asylum, spends the rest of his life in there only wishing Chris had listened to him about the person watching them originally.